One of the strangest unsolved disappearances took place in one of the busiest areas of Chicago on the evening of May 15, 1970. An older couple, Edward and Stephania Andrews, left the parking garage of the Chicago Sheraton and seemingly dropped off the face of the earth. A former Chicago police chief called it, quote, the strangest disappearance case I've ever seen or heard about. And in the 51 years that have passed since their disappearance, police are really no closer to solving the case. Join me as we explore the disappearance of Edward and Stephania Andrews. From all accounts, May 15, 1970 began like any other day for the couple. Ed and Stephania were both 62 years old and had been married for about 6 years. Ed was described by his employer as trustworthy and responsible. His ex-wife described him as, quote, very conscientious with a strong sense of responsibility towards his job. His brother-in-law described him as neat and orderly. Stephania was described by friends as personable and outgoing. Their friends said the couple were, quote, very devoted to one another and had a lot of zest for living. They also said that they were two well-mated people and they got along very well. The couple would commute to work together each day from their quiet tree-lined street in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Ed disliked the high speed on the expressway, so they would usually take the Northwest Highway to US 14 and then onto Lakeshore Drive. Ed, who was semi-retired, would work 3 to 4 days a week as a manager/bookkeeper at the Miller Peerless Manufacturing Company. Nothing too unusual here. The company he worked for made fire extinguishers. His wife, Stephania, worked at the local loan co. as a credit investigator and had worked there for 27 years. They arrived at their respective jobs, and coworkers would later report that nothing seemed unusual that morning. Around noon, Ed had lunch with friends and former coworkers E.J. Kropmeyer and John Firkin at Pizzeria Uno. While eating, Ed suddenly became ill but seemed to mostly recover. He returned to work but didn't really do any work for the rest of the day. Around 6:15 p.m., Ed and Stephania arrived at the Chicago Sheraton for the Women's Auxiliary Beverage Institute cocktail party. Other people who were there at the event said the couple again seemed fine and in good spirits. No one heard Ed complain of not feeling well while at the party, although he was said to have had several drinks. Around 9:30 p.m., the couple was seen heading towards the elevator. Another couple rode in the elevator with them to the parking garage. The parking attendants would later tell police that Ed was staggering as he was walking to the car, and they were concerned that he shouldn't be driving. He insisted he was fine to drive and got behind the wheel. At this point, Stephania was said to be crying, and when the lot manager told Ed he should not be driving, he said a tearful Stephania nodded yes, that Ed was not in a condition to drive. Ed pulled away and ran immediately into the garage doors he was trying to leave. Instead of stopping, he sped out of the garage and turned left into the northbound lanes of Lower Michigan Avenue, heading south. The lot manager ran after the car but lost sight of it after it passed Illinois Avenue. It wasn't until Tuesday, May 19th, that the couple's friends and family realized that something was wrong. After the second day of not showing up for work, Ed's boss called Stephania's boss and realized that they both had missed work. They then called Stephania's brother John Reinach, and he went to their house in Arlington Heights to check on them. When he pulled up to the house, he noticed newspapers by the front door. The house was quiet, and he called the Arlington Heights police. When the police arrived, they entered the house with John using a key and found the house was empty and the car was not in the garage. The house had every appearance of someone expecting to return. There were dirty breakfast dishes in the sink and grapefruit rinds on the kitchen table. After speaking with the neighbors, they found that the Andrews were supposed to have dinner with them on Saturday, the 16th, but never showed. It became clear that the Andrews never made it home that evening. By the 22nd, a week after the Andrews disappeared, the Arlington Heights police asked the Chicago police to use their helicopters to search along roadsides, near rivers, and other bodies of water. Police also searched the O'Hare Airport. The Chicago Towing Department had no record of the Andrews' car being towed to a pound due to parking tickets. At this point, the Chicago River is searched for the first time. On June 2nd, the FBI begins circulating Ed's fingerprints, which they had on record from when he was involved with some government work. Police went to the hotel to try and reenact the events that took place the night the couple disappeared. They believe they found the spot where the Andrews car, a 1969 black and yellow Oldsmobile Cutlass, entered the Chicago River. Near Lower Michigan Avenue and Wacker Drive, which was under construction at the time, police believe Ed realized he was driving on the wrong side of the road or was run off the road by an oncoming car and made a sharp left turn. There was a steep dirt downgrade that led straight into the river. Normally, there would have been a guardrail, but due to the construction, it had been temporarily removed. When police inspected the area more closely, they found 2 marks which led them to believe the car went off at that point. The marks were a scrape on a concrete pillar and faint tire marks in the dirt. On the 4th of June, the police again dragged the Chicago River. They were certain the car would be found in the area near Lower Michigan Avenue and Wacker Drive. Helicopters were busy searching the streets and highways the couple might have used on their way home. The search in the river comes up empty. 8 days later, the river is searched again. Police believe the car is now not in the river and could have possibly floated out to Lake Michigan. I want to point out that the lot manager who saw the couple drive away said that both of their windows were down at the time. In the coming weeks and months, police would repeatedly search the river as well as the mouth of Lake Michigan. Divers and boats equipped with sonar were used. Divers were used to search a lagoon and dust plains based on a tip. Although 3 cars were pulled from the lagoon, none of them belonged to the Andrews. By October of 1970, the Arlington Heights police chief was stumped. Quote, "The fact that we've never been able to find the car is what makes it so unusual." Meanwhile, Stephania's brother John has been caring for the home, paying for the mortgage and utilities himself, as well as paying a local kid to keep the yard looking nice. On January 22, 1971, the police got word that the body of an older woman washed up on the shore of Lake Michigan near Muskegon on December 8th. They quickly sent Stephania's dental x-rays to the police to help with identification. Stephania had had oral surgery in 1963 and had part of her lower jawbone removed. The body that was found washed up on the beach showed no evidence of oral surgery. Once again, the police were back where they started. By May of that year, police were still certain that the car was somewhere in the Chicago River. Perhaps it had floated a ways from where it entered the water, or maybe it was pushed down into the soft mud by a passing boat. On November 30th, 1971, John paid for technicians from Motorola to search the river with sonar. The river was searched from Wells Street to Navy Pier. The Motorola engineering manager was quoted as saying, "I can say that we're 95% sure that the car isn't down there." By 1973, the police have had no new leads. They still believe that they drove into the river. Their house in Arlington Heights had been rented for the last 2 years, with John depositing the monthly rent into the Andrews bank accounts. Other than him depositing the rent, there's been no activity on their accounts since they disappeared. No activity was found on their credit cards either. They simply vanished from the face of the earth. The new tenants didn't speak about the Andrews very much. Apparently, it creeped out their grandkids. On June 5th, 1974, the police undertake a search of the river once more, this time using a specially outfitted boat. They also searched the Ogden Slip at the mouth of the river. A man had come forward saying he was working near the river in May 1970 and thinks the Andrews were on their way to a sandwich stand near where the North Pier Terminal building once stood. The west side of that slip had not been searched previously because barges anchored there would have made electronic soundings difficult. And then we get to the psychics. It was also around this time when police asked a psychic to help them in their search. A woman named Carol Broman was given a hairbrush that belonged to the Andrews to help her, quote, tune into their vibrations. They searched the river again, this time near the Lake Point Tower building. They also searched a remote lagoon in a wooded area near Oakton Street and Elmhurst Road in Des Plaines. This was based on Carol's impressions. Carol said the bodies would be found in the trunk of their car, sunk in a deep lake. Nothing came from her visions. Other psychics began speaking publicly about the case as well. One said she felt they were murdered on the south side after a robbery gone wrong. And on November 3rd, 1975, a psychic named Gary Wayne went public stating he wanted to create a, quote, psychic task force to help the Chicago police with unsolved cases such as Jimmy Hoffa disappearance and the Andrews case. He was quick to point out that he has not helped solve any crimes yet, but he did once help a woman find her lost ring. I'm not quite sure whatever happened to Gary Wayne, but I do know that his psychic task force never got off the ground. 6 years after the couple vanished, the police believe that the car must be in Lake Michigan. They had no new leads to go off of, and the following year, in May 1977, the Andrews were declared legally deceased. Their house was sold, along with some of their personal belongings. The rest of their items were donated to local charities. In May 1978, John has a change in beliefs and now thinks that the couple was murdered in a strange case of mistaken identity. He said he measured the marks on the door of the garage, and the only car that could have left those marks was a Buick Electra. His bizarre theory was that if Ed was drunk, maybe he accepted the keys to the wrong car, and the mysterious couple that rode down to the garage in the elevator with them took the Andrews car. Quote, I think someone had that car spotted and killed them, and later discovering he made the wrong hit, chopped up the car and disposed of the bodies. According to John, no one ever heard from the couple in the elevator after the initial police questioning. The most frustrating event in this entire case took place in May 1986. The Army Corps of Engineers dredged the Chicago River for the first time in more than 20 years. Despite both the Arlington Heights Police Department and John Reinach asking them years prior to be notified if they ever dredged the river, both are unaware that the river was dredged until a few days after it was completed. The Dunbar and Sullivan Dredging Company of Cleveland scraped tons of material from the harbor to Clark Avenue. The Army Corps said they pulled 11 cars out of the river, but only one complete car was turned over to the Chicago police. It was a 1967 Chevy Malibu. The Army Corps said they reported all cars and parts pulled from the river to the police, but the police would say they received no such information. The Dunbar and Sullivan Dredging Company said that only one complete car was pulled from the river. The rest was all bumpers, axles, and tires. A detective from the Arlington Heights Police Department said they hadn't received any new leads in more than 8 years, and he felt like they lost the opportunity to solve the case when they missed out on the dredging of the river. In the 35 years that have passed since the river was dredged, only one incident of note has come up. In 1994, a pond near Green Oaks was searched after a 36-year-old man who was somehow related to the Andrews claimed to know what happened to the couple. In a strange statement to police, he said he had recently overcome 2 decades of amnesia and now knew that the couple had been killed by Lake Forest youths, put in the trunk, and the car dumped in the pond. At the time of the Andrews disappearance, the pond was privately owned and used for water skiing. In the years following, the pond became overgrown and obscured by weeds. The pond was searched by police and a, quote, large object was identified at the bottom of the pond and 2 pieces of metal resembling car parts were recovered. The police were extremely skeptical of the man's story. It contained several errors, and they weren't willing to do anything further until they were able to find out what was under all the silt in the pond. The last mention was that they were trying to obtain imaging and sonar equipment. It is unknown if they ever did that. I find these cases fascinating because you would think that it isn't easy to simply disappear with no trace, and yet it happens quite frequently. I'm going to list some of the questions I have and would love to know what you think, so please comment below. Downtown Chicago is a busy place. The Andrews left the hotel at 9:30 on a Friday night. I can't imagine that downtown Chicago was a complete ghost town at that time. If the car went off the road into the river, how were there no witnesses? If they were run off the road by an oncoming car, one would assume that the other driver would have noticed them driving off the road and perhaps even into the river. Yet police received no reports that I am aware of from any drivers in that area on that evening. John Reinach and an unnamed friend of Stephania's were convinced that the lot attendants were mistaken with the claims of seeing and speaking to the Andrews before they left. Reinach seems to really have had an issue with the couple who stated that they took the elevator to the garage with the Andrews and saw them get in their car. Why? Reinach said that there was no way that Ed would have hit the garage door and not have gotten out to inspect the damage. The obvious issue here being if he was drunk, he wouldn't necessarily be rational. Also, I want to point out that Andrews were not known to be heavy drinkers by people who knew them well. Ed's friend Croftmeyer later said he believed that Ed might have had a minor heart attack at lunch that day, and another heart attack while heading for the garage, giving him the appearance of being drunk. If the car was crushed into the soft riverbed by a passing ship, as the police thought was a possibility, wouldn't the ship have felt something? Is this a common occurrence and ships just don't report? I have a feeling that this is going to be one of those strange cases that ends up getting solved like 60, 70 years later. Like they're gonna find the car somewhere, whether it's in the Chicago River that somehow got missed all those times, or in Lake Michigan, or maybe in just some random pond that they haven't even looked at yet. You would think that this would be the type of case where they could easily disappear from another city, a smaller city that wasn't as busy as Chicago. But Chicago is a massive city. There's people everywhere. And I think that's the strangest part for me, is that apparently there were absolutely no witnesses that saw them driving after leaving the hotel. And that just seems so strange. That also brings us to the end of this very strange case of the disappearance of Edward and Stephania Andrews. I would love to hear your thoughts on the case. Make sure to comment below. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, please make sure to give it a like and follow. As always, my name is Jennifer Jones. See you next time.